Bom dia a todas e a todos. Espero que estejam me ouvindo bem. Com muito gosto que estou aqui hoje. Como a Rosa já me apresentou, me chamo Júlia, sou investigadora da equipe desse projeto. E hoje, como já foi falado, nossa primeira mesa também vai ser nesse esquema plurilíngue. Eu vou daqui a pouco pedir licença para falar em inglês também, mas quis fazer essa breve apresentação em português. Hoje nós temos 3 palestrantes aqui conosco, tanto presencialmente aí na sala de atos quanto online. Então, fazendo a Oi, Jéssica. Achei que a Jéssica estava falando comigo, mas não. Então, fazendo a transição agora rapidamente para o inglês. Good morning to you all. My name is Julia. I'm really glad to be here today with you all. As I was saying, today, don't worry, we're going to switch between different languages. Just to explain you briefly how we're going to work. Each of our speakers will have about 20 to 25 minutes to speak. Then you can all gather your questions, comments to the end of our roundtable, and then at the end you can share with us, and we will try to discuss, to have more time to discuss with each other at the end of the roundtable. So to begin with, I want to introduce our first speaker, Professor Giovanna Leone. She's a full professor at the Department of Communication and Social Research of Sapienza University, Sapienza University of Rome, Italy. She has extensive research on collective memory, intergroup emotions, and reconciliation processes. Professor Giovanna, thank you for being here today. So the floor is yours now.
Thank you. Thank you to you all, and I am really happy and thrilled to be here and to have this occasion to work with you and also to learn from this project that sounds so exciting. And I thought that perhaps it could be handy, I hope, to just to share some of the research that we are conducting currently in Italy, in my department. It is a department of social research that is mainly focused on communication, on the many ways in which we communicate in everyday life. And since a while, we are interested in the way in which we communicate by using objects and how objects in our surroundings are communicating a lot of things, also beyond our awareness, and are communicating also about this difficult trip. I agree with the Rosa idea that it is a difficult trip, that we are in a journey, and in this journey we are trying to develop a new kind of identity that is multi-layered and that is also welcoming differences. But in this kind of trip, we could also make some observations that are related to a kind of communication that usually is just in the background of our awareness. That is the kind of object that we are using in our everyday life. Adios plástico is communicating a lot, and also the fact that I am using this old, watch, wristwatch, is communicating something about me and my identity as an old Italian woman. And today I would like to share some of our work that we are currently conducting in a group of study that is a mixed group in which we are with colleagues from psychology, from sociology, from architecture, from design, from journalism. We are a group trying to study this problem of the object. And I will start with this quote that is very dear for us as psychologists. That is a quote by Lev Vygotsky during a period that, like this period, was very hard for the European history and also for this young researcher that was truly, truly passionate to social revolution, but he was so unlucky because he was in the period in which the dreams of a generation were turning into the nightmare of the Stalin domination. And in that period, when the idea of conditioning the human beings through the elemental memory process that are shared by animals and humans at the same way as Pavlov so brilliantly have shown in his experiments, and that was the standard and the mainstream of his cultural environment. He tried to arise awareness about processes of human memory that are completely different from these elemental processes that are linked to the fact that we can actively orientate our remembering with the help of signs. Sorry. The beautiful words of just try to quote verbatim the Vygotsky. As one psychologist has said, the very essence of civilization consists in the fact that we deliberately build monuments so as not to forget. In the knotted handkerchief and the monument, we see the most profound, most characteristic, and most important feature which distinguishes human from animal memory. And we are trying to work on this trace, on this suggestion, and we try to work in a borderline that is between the important decision of building monuments and the institutional memories, and the handkerchief, the knotted handkerchiefs, that are the little things that we use to help ourselves to remember something. And so today we will present some of our results about the ephemeral objects that are linked to colonialism and that still are replaced our physical environment. In Italy, I will speak about Rome, but I think a little everywhere, we can find ephemeral objects that seem not conspicuous, so to speak, innocent little objects, but they are reminding of us of colonial times. And this is our interest of research today. I will say we, because of course, we are a group of people, PhD students, other colleagues, historians. So we are a bunch of people. So I will say we. Okay. Thank you, Isabel. We are trying to study the effect of these material traces of colonial times in our European context. And we are studying not only the institutional traces and the cultural traces, but also this kind of ephemeral objects. And I am very passionate about this study of us, so please stop me and so remind me of the time, because I can start speaking about this for hours, but I will not. And the basic idea that people differently react to these objects depending on their social representation of colonial times, but also because of their knowledge of colonial times. And I will use the Italian case study, first of all, because I am Italian, but also because I think that this is an interesting case study, because in our context, in our cultural context, the colonial violence that we enacted in a very serious way during the short period of our colonial invasion, in which the Italian army committed very, very serious violation and criminal acts, has not been discussed in our society, has not been taught to the young generation. So we are now in a situation in which, when we start to realize, to raise awareness on how much some kind of ephemeral objects are related to this violence that we don't know, many of us don't know, these objects are provoking a kind of ambivalent reactions. They are nostalgic, they are very, sweet objects, because they are reminding of past generation, of the family history, something that is very sweet. But when we start to understand also the other facets, then the reaction change, and change according to not only to the social representation, but according to the historical knowledge, and also according to the generation of the people that react. This is the main idea. Thank you. And we are studying how these objects trigger different reactions, because people grasp in different way the relation between this object and the colonial past. It means that sometimes they gaze at the object, but they don't see the object. In other times, when they have more historical awareness, they start to see the object, and many times to find this object also unbelievable and very offensive or very embarrassing, or also a little morally disgusting. So we have this kind of reaction, a lack of visibility, or an indifference, is something of the past, or also a nostalgic attitude, but also a moral reject. And so we are studying these different reactions. Everyone knows about, everyone but not the Italian, know about the Italian invasion and occupation of Africa in the 30s, and the creation of what was called in the classic fascist rhetoric, the Oriental Italian Africa. You can imagine Mussolini speaking about that. They were among the last European colonial invasion. They lasted shortly and collapsed after the defeat of the fascist regime. They were simply a strategy in which the regime tried to distract the attention from their failure. And during this short period, very, very serious war crimes were committed. But still now in the societal discourse, we refer to this period saying the colonial adventure. And the word adventure is something that is fascinating, also a little funny, We make jokes about this idea that we were so stupid to have an empire and to not to have the possibility to have the rich part only doing, the job of building the hospitals, the kind of civilization, and then, and the Italian discourse is plenty of this kind of tricks. Quite nobody knows about the war crimes. And usually when we do our lessons about this, usually we have from 5 to 10 students that ask to make the dissertation about that. So we are now in this situation that there is a societal silence, but also there is a self-censorship. That means that people that knows about these events chose not to speak about them. This kind of self-censorship is justified in many ways, but the result is that colonial crimes are covered up since now. So there is a kind of societal amnesia that seems to begin to melt only in the last decades. And here I quote our first article on this topic. We started to work on this knowledge and social representation because it's interesting, because it's changing by day to day. We are now, little by little, this knowledge is gaining momentum in the Italian society. So, because of this, the material traces that still are present in the Italian context are difficult to perceive by contemporary inhabitants because they are linked to this historical period that is still unknown to many. And speaking about material traces, we have different kinds of material traces. Just to make a long history short, we have the institutional reminders. Here are photos of some of these institutional reminders, name of streets in the city of Rome, monuments, and these are the first reminders that were due to an institutional choice to create urban memory intermediation. What is interesting of this intermediation, they were mostly created during the fascist time, and that these monuments, name of streets, are still there, but nobody knows why. And if you look at these names, usually people make a kind of confabulation about the meaning why. For instance, in the center of Rome, there is a very beautiful street that is Via dei Fori Imperiali, no? That is just in between the Roman ruins, of the ancient Fori, no? And everybody say, yes, this is the name is referred to the Roman colonial empire. But this name was imposed by Mussolini when declaring this kind of fake, empire. But everybody say, yes, of course, this is the Roman Empire. So this is the intriguing part. The second part, you have material traces that we could see linked to a kind of cultural message. For instance, all the materials that were collected in museum as a way to display how primitive were the culture from which these objects were stolen, and how they needed a kind of civilization, so to speak. And also these objects are now very embarrassing objects. Some of these objects, the first photo is referred to a very important collection of objects that is in Rome, that is still now were closed up because they didn't know what to do with all these objects. They simply closed this museum. Now this museum is reopening, and we are happy we are participating to this reopening in the midst of very difficult debates if there is the case of opening a museum about colonial times or not. And what is interesting is the fact that some of the Italian historians say is not the case. Please let this closed. And the second generation of Italian young people with the brown skin that were the children of mixed marriage say, on the contrary, no, please open up this museum again. So there is a very interesting cultural fight in Rome about that. Also, you know, this experience of the zoological gardens in which the people were shown as a kind of object in order to be seen for the European children. And here I quote an experience that was closed up during the 90s in France after a big scandal about that. So another kind of material traces. But what we are working on these ephemeral traces of colonial times, and being in Rome, we are studying a kind of commercial products that are linked to colonialism by the link of food. You know, as Italian, we are very fond of food. This is one of our characteristics, to be fond of food. And today I will try to say just a couple of words about a research that we are doing about a food that is related to a characteristic of the Italian culture, that is the coffee, caffè, okay? And here you see some images of a kind of food that now is in the center of some of the debates in Rome, in my city. Two kinds of pasta that were called abissine, tripoline. This was the kind of pasta that was just glorifying. And this name, until now, is not changed, but now people start to understand why they are called abissine, tripoline. And this is also a very beautiful shop nearby my home in Rome, where I used to buy my coffee, that is named Castroni, and you see the name of the shop is about the colonial food, droghe e coloniali, okay? This is. We are studying this kind of food, a kind of candy that is called nougatine. You see an advertisement of the 30 during the period in which this candy was created to glorify the colonial empire. But what is interesting is that this candy also had a lot of merchandising. As for instance, this little bébé that was given to children with this kind of food. Also, when I was little, I was offered by my family that was not colonial at all, that was anti-fascist, completely anti-fascist, but I had a lot of this little baby because if you had certain numbers of nougatine, you had this baby. And that is interesting because while we started to study this topic, Garvin, that is a colleague, an Anglo-Saxon colleague, published a very interesting article about the idea that the Italian colonial empire was a caffeinated empire because intertwined the history of chocolate and coffee in order to create an imaginary of links between the three continents, the Brazil, Ethiopia, and Italy during the fascist ventennio regime. And the Italian coffee shops became key seats for the promotion of fascist imperial projects in East Africa. And what is interesting is this architectural and artistic legacy remains in place today, not only in Italy, but also in Africa and everywhere where this candy is bought and sold. You have also this kind of merchandising. And this is a photo that I took from the coffee shop nearby my university. I entered and I took a photo of this, and this is the, the way of offering this kind of candy. How much time I have?
Excuse me, Professor Giovanna,
okay.
just a kindly reminder, 5 minutes more.
Five, I am, okay, very, very quick.
3 to 5 minutes. But that's okay.
This is the candy. You see in the packaging this drawing, this original drawing that is called the Moretto, this black child with an oriental turban with the color of the Italian drap. And this was this silent reminiscence of Italian colonialism that is still in. And in the last year, what is interesting is the fact that the people selling this chocolate tray are more neutral packaging, but when using this more neutral packaging, no one was recognizing the Moretto, and so there were a lot of justification saying that food is strongly linked to autobiographical memories, and so now there are the two versions, circulating. And so we are now trying to see how people grasp this relation between this everyday object and the colonial past. And we conducted two studies. One is already published. The other we are near to publish. The first is based on interviews. The second is based on a survey. The interviews, we tried to provoke a change in the reaction, giving the information about the candy. So we have this spontaneous reaction and comments, looking at the image. Everything was done during the period in which the COVID was very dominant in Italy. So it was done by the internet, So people could see this image and have this spontaneous reaction. And then the interview the interviewer told about the colonial history, and then we have the change of the reaction, and we have these differences linked to this manipulation, but also linked to the generation. And the moral rejection was just shown by the younger respondents. Of course, there are only qualitative data, a small sample. You see only a little less than 20 subjects of different generations. So we had this idea of doing it with more people, and we created 4 conditions: the image with or without the moretto, and sided by a text or without the text. So we have these 4 conditions, quite 200 respondents, and the age, big span of age, divided in 3 groups. And we had no significant differences among conditions referred to a feeling of guilt, but interesting, a difference referred to a feeling of moral shame, and also a difference referred to moral judgment of this kind of packaging today circulating in Italy, both between condition and age. And so to conclude, we are now seeing that a moral emotion of shame is only referred to the condition in which the link with the colonial past is made explicit both by text and by packaging. It means that the packaging is very useful to have this kind of packaging, but only when we explain very clearly what this packaging means. In this case, this ephemeral object is a very good occasion to have an historical awareness. The moral judgment about commercializing this product is only for the younger generation. And so the idea is that these ephemeral objects are interesting, but also when you have a full grasping of the racist meaning of this apparently innocent product. Anyway, for older generation, the nostalgic attitudes of the autobiographical memories hinder this distancing from this ephemeral object. So we are confident in the renewal of the generation. And just to end up, this is a photo in the city center of Rome, nearby the Italian parliament. It's a very famous Italian cafe in which I hope we will go one day together and have a good cup of Italian coffee. And you see this image of this semi-naked young woman. This is a fascist image, okay? Everybody goes and gaze without seeing this image. And quite everyone is indifferent or blind to this image. And I think that much work has still to be done. And I hope that some of this work we will do also together in the future. Thank you, and thank you for the passion.